Okay, here we are, Yud Shvat. Yud Shvat. Hayom Yom. When my grandmother, the Rebbetzin Rivka, was 18, this is the Frierdiker Rebbe speaking. Remember this whole Basi Lagani story, right? That this mimer was put together to be delivered on the birthday of the grandmother. And the grandmother passed away on Yud Shvat, as did the Frierdiker Rebbe. And so this day is quite embedded in the consciousness, if you want to say, the history of the Frierdiker Rebbe. So he's now speaking about his grandmother, Rebbetzin Rivka, for whom this mimer was meant to be delivered and published in remembrance of her yortzeit. So when my grandmother, Rebbetzin Rivka, was 18, she fell ill, and the physician ordered her to eat immediately upon awakening. She was very religious, so she did not wish to eat before davening. So she davened very early, then ate breakfast. When her father-in-law, the Tzemach Tzedek, learned of this, he said to her, "A Jew must be healthy and strong. The Torah says about mitzvahs, you should live in them, meaning bring vitality into the mitzvah. To be able to infuse mitzvahs with vitality, one must be strong and joyful." Then he concluded, "You should not be without food." There's a famous line that everybody quotes in Chabad when they talk to a person who's not Chabad, who doesn't eat before davening. The famous line, "Better to eat for the sake of davening rather than to daven for the sake of eating." He then blessed her with long life. She was born in 1833, passed away in 1914. That's 81 years, which for them is a nice long life. My father told this teaching of the Tzemach Tzedek to someone at Yehidus, adding, "And this must be done with joy." In other words, even though there's an order in terms of halacha that says that you should daven and then eat, if it's a question of not having the strength, then you eat before davening. And in addition to that, that will give you joy, and everything must be done with joy, because you have to say, "B'chai b'chem," you should live, you should have a lot of vitality in all the mitzvahs. Therefore, if you need to eat before the mitzvah, eat. All right, Lessons in Tanya is page 292. And the classical Tanya,
it's very interesting
to
note that
we're on page 54.
It's very interesting just to note that this is Yud Shvat, and the Rebbe's one of the watchwords of the Rebbe was Hamaisa Hua Ikar, that the main thing is to do stuff, to bring it in action and reality, and the physical things we do on this world actually have the highest source of all, and that how this relates to physicality in a way. So I thought that was nice.
Very nice. So, thank you. We've been talking about here the Panemius of Ratzon and the Acharayim of Ratzon. The inner part of Ratzon, will. Will is a makif power, right? It encompasses everything, penetrates everything equally. But there are levels in Ratzon itself. There's the Panemius, the inner dimensions of will, which are Kedusha. And then there's the backside, the Acharayim, the backside, so to speak, of Ratzon, which is the Ratzon of the Sitra Achra, the Makif of the Sitra Achra, which we're going to now get into a little bit more detail. The Hine, okay, we are on at the bottom, about, 15 lines up from the bottom of the page. On the right side is a Baruch Hu, Beis apostrophe Hey, period. The supernal will, which is a manner of Panemius, the Panemius of Ratzon. I think we should just make a note that Panemius is used in two different ways. There are the powers which are called Panemi, the Panemi powers, the powers which enter into and are diffused through the 10 Sephiros. And those Panemi powers are responsible for the particular characteristics of anything, or of everything, each individual thing. For instance, in the body, the difference between the brain, and the difference in the heart, they each get a different kind of chayas, a panimi, a different kind of chayas panimi. The brain gets what's particular to it, and the heart gets what's particular to it. And as a result, the two organs are differentiated from another. I'm just using that as an example. Or panimi is what differentiates everything from each other. That's panimi. Or makif, excuse me, is a light, is an energy which encompasses everything equally, is responsible for the fact that anything which exists is in a state of existence. It's a yes or no. It's either in existence or it isn't. And if it's in existence, it's because of the or makif. So that's the difference between or makif and or panimi. Now, in or makif itself, there's the second way we're going to use the word, the way we're using it today, the panemius of the makif, the panemius of the ratzon, or the chitzonius, or the acharayim, the backside of the ratzon. Just to get those definitions sort of clear. So, mehine ratzon ha'elyon b'chinas panim, the supernal will, when we speak about the panemius of the will, panim, face, panemius, this enlivens everything, right? This is the ratzon is the enlivening. In English translation, they often translate it transcendent, but the Alter Rebbe in Tanya himself says, be very careful with that. It doesn't mean that it's hovering from above. It's penetrating everything, but it's penetrating everything equally. So this is responsible, as he said here, this panemius of the ratzon is the source of life, which enlivens kol halamas, all worlds. And since this panemius ratzon is not dwelling on the sitra achra, the sitra achra, as we said above, gets its life from the acharayim, yeah? Sitra achra, which is a place of tuma and a place of death, it gets its life force from the dark side, well, not the backside. That's the more accurate use of the word in the Tanya, the backside of this. So the sitra achra is enlivened by the backside. And this backside is not really enclosed in the sitra achra mamish. It's hovering, but hovering not from above. It's everywhere equal. It's everywhere equal. That's the definition of makif. But it's makif on the sitra on the sitra achra, and it's makif and creates the force of the sitra achra, milamayla, from above. Lokach, therefore, mokum hamisa v'tuma, Hashem yishmerenu. Therefore, the all-encompassing force that's enlivening a person, we're going to use the mushal of paroi later, faroi, is this all-encompassing power which is coming not from the place of chayas, even though it is a chayas, an energy which is enlivening, but it's not a chayas, it's not enlivening. It's an interesting way to put this, but its life force is a fourth of death. Its life force is a fourth of death, because it's dark. It's the acharayim. It's the negative. Hashem yishmerenu. Hashem should protect us from this. It's only that there's a little bit of light which this sitra achra receives from the acharayim, from the backside, nibechinas acharayim, as he says, from the backside of kedusha, shelamayla, up above, hu bebechinas galus mamish besoichai. So this little bit of light is not only that it's a makif, which it is, but it's a makif in a state of galus. It's not really, it's not penetrating the way kedusha penetrates. So a simple way of saying this is when a person is under the influence of this, you're not really under the influence of the real you. The real you is much deeper than this. The real you is the or panimi, the inner panemius or of the ratzon, which is seated in the nefesh elokis, which we've talked about, that slumbering coal that's ready for action if you can fire it up. That's the true you. That's the essential true you, the you of kedusha. The you of the opposite of kedusha, le'olenu, Hashem yishmerenu, as he said, is something that's obscuring the true you. And it's in, and that obscuration, that state of obscurity, I guess is the right word, is called gullus, the state where the penimis ratzon is being totally smothered by the chitzonius of the ratzon, b'bechinas gullus mamish, in a state of mamish exile. That's called gullus. B'seicho, within a person. B'soid gullus ha-shechina, in accordance with the notion of the exile of the Shekhinah. That God's presence, and Malchus is also, Malchus is associated with the Kesser. Kesser is the Ratzon. And when the Ratzon is in so-called, in the state of Achorayim, backside, it's called that Gullus of the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah is in exile. And therefore it's called Elakim Achedim. There's a godly force, Elakim, and as we're going to learn even about Pharaoh, he acknowledges that there's a godly force, but it's in a state of acharayim. It's in a state of backside, dark side, backside, the back of the neck, not panemius. Shehi avera zora mamish. That's idol worship at mamish. Ukafira be'agdusa shel melech malkim lagman kodesh baruch hu. And what is avera zora? It's the denial in the oneness of the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He. Now we're going to see that it doesn't mean that you can acknowledge the existence of it, of the God, but it has no meaning to your life. It's not internalized. It's not panimi. So therefore, the presence of the enlivening force of God, which you can acknowledge, is not something which is motivating, and it's not something that you have adhesion to, because the power of the dark side, the backside of the Sitra Achra is what's predominant. So this is denial in the unity of, not necessarily the existence of God, but in the unity of God, and that unity of God which implies that things should be running in accordance with the will of that unity. So that's the kafir be'achdusa. It's denying the oneness of Hashem. Since the light, the energy, the light, and the life force of holiness is in a state of gullus b'seicha, within this Sitra Achra, enu batela klal legabi kedushas hakodesh baruch hu. So therefore, the force of the Sitra Achra, since it's in a state of acherim, backside, not panimi, it's in a state of exile. So its activity doesn't create a sense of bittul, nullification, to the holiness of the Kodesh Baruch Hu. Now, on the contrary, it causes that ma'bia atzma kanesha. This is the state of ultimate conceit. It raises the person up, and that the person feels that the person is the singular power, that I'm an independent entity. And you don't have to be Pharaoh for this. I mean, this is a fairly dominant activity in a culture. It's just whatever is good for me is what's good. And if it's good for the two of us and we both agree, then it's good. There are no Kedusha Dika standards. They're just what's about me. So this happens, in individuals besides great people like the Pare. But the Pare of Egypt is the example of this. And the Pare of Egypt says, and the Sitra Achra says, Ani ba'afsi oid. I alone am the ruler, the dominate. I'm in charge of everything. I'm in charge of myself. Kamaimer, the sages, this is from Shmais, referring to Paro, says this. Ya'areli, the river is me. Ba'ani asisani, and I make myself. I'm a self-made man. Right? I mean, that sounds very nice to say. Very nice, But here we're taking it a little bit farther. I mean, the raison d'etre for my life is only what satisfies me, what pleases me and makes me feel good, and that's the Sitra Achra. It's a state of it's the opposite state of hakel. It's the opposite state of unification. The opposite state of having humility to see the greatness in each other and to unify with each other. It creates separation. Malachin, Omnu Razal, our sages have said, that hardiness is equal to Avodah Zarah. Because the root and the source of Avodah Zorah starts with a person considering oneself to be something on their own, nifrad, separate from the holiness of God, who is called here the place. And this is what I said earlier. It doesn't mean the person has to deny the existence of God at all. It used to be Gemara, it's brought in the Gemara, they call God the God of gods. I mean, I have a friend who's a Hindu, and he acknowledges very much the God of gods. Yet he worships the other gods, the things that God has put in place, and has no problem with that. So I can acknowledge the existence of God, right? And that's fine. And I can even acknowledge that if without that, I wouldn't exist. But at the same time, it's really, and now that I do exist, it's about me. He made me, didn't he? He made me, if I look around, I'm not unified. I'm not melting into everybody else. I'm a separate person. And I can learn from that separateness, if I want to, in a negative way, that it's all about me. Even though I acknowledge that God is the enlivening force within me. They can acknowledge that God is the enlivening force within each one of them, each one of us, but they consider themselves to be something on their own, nevertheless. And why not? You feel like you're something on your own. You don't feel intuitively that you're part and parcel of everybody else. That's something that needs to be cultivated. And with this conceit, this is the start of the whole deal. With this conceit, this little bit of conceit, one begins to separate oneself from the holiness of Hashem, blessed be He, because one is not completely bottled and given over to the holiness and the panemius of the Hashem's Ratzon. Because the supernal holiness can only rest on one who is nullified, bottled to Hashem. Yisborach, may He be blessed, as we've mentioned many times above. Therefore, this kind of person, this one who's full of one's own conceitedness and separatedness, is called, in the language of the Zohar, mountains of separation. Because though one may acknowledge the presence of God, you don't have to be an atheist for this. You can very much acknowledge that. In fact, most of the Veda Zohar, they're not atheists, right? They believe in supernal powers, and they believe even in the singular supernal power which spawns the other supernal powers. But this is a denial that this oneness and singularity, and what comes from, and what comes out of that oneness and singularity, is the dominant, all-encompassing force which should bring everybody together, everything together. So that without that, the separation is called kafira. It's called denial. The hamitis, in God's singularity, in God's true oneness. The kula kamei chashiv. It's a denial in the fact that really everything is considered like nothing in front of Him. Who batal be'emes le'yizborach. Everything, right? Nothing exists without Him, and He is alone is the true existence. So therefore, if one contemplated this a little bit, so even I, who appear to be something separate, are not something separate. I can't be something separate because leis asher pani minei, there is no place that's free of Him, including this place where I feel that I am free of Him. And if I acknowledge that it's impossible to be free of Him, that can lead me to achnoah, subjugation of the negativity, and humility. And as we said, being bottled to Hashem. And if that person goes in that line of thinking, then one knows that everything is bottled to Hashem Yisborach, into His will, Hamachayas Kulam, which enlivens everything, Umahava Oisem, and which brings them into being, Me'ayin L'yesh Tamid, and is bringing everything into being from nothing to something continually. And that's the end of Perek Chof Beis. There's a lot in here. Yeah, I mean, we've discovered really here the source of the illusion of isolation and separateness, which of course in its negative state, the sense of isolation can bring around a sense of depression and all the negative things that come out of that. All that's from the Ratzon, the Acharayim, the backside of Hashem's will. And we've discovered also that deeper than that, and available to our use, for our use, is the Panemius of Ratzon, the feeling that in spite of the appearance of singularity and diversity, which is a true thing, it's a reality that God creates, underlying it and deeper than that is the sense of communion and communication and inter-inclusion and allness and bittul to the oneness of Hashem. Any comments? A lot of people here to good comments. Okay. How about Abichaim? So
well, I have a question. I always have a question.
I'm
a little. I missed a little because it's stormy here, so I lost the connection when you began speaking of Avodah Zorah. But when I came back, I wasn't quite sure. I wasn't getting the nuance.
What's your question?
Between the Sitra Achra and the use of Sitra Achra and the use of Avodah Zorah.
Sitra Achra is the source of Avodah Zorah. The Sitra Achra is the back side or the other side. It's an energy that comes from Hashem's will, but it comes from the externality of Hashem's will, as opposed to the panemius of his will. And when one attaches oneself to that, that leads to Avodah Zorah in its worst forms and in its very much more refined and sometimes not identifiable. What I mean by that, the worst is the actual service of Avodah Zorah and the denial of the service of Hashem, who is the source of everything. And the more subtle is conceit. And conceit is an example. Conceit, meaning preoccupation with the self, each one of us only after what we want and not being able to be given over. I mean, we put this in a subtle way, a subtle but common way, is where relationship starts to fall apart, where each one in the relationship is in the relationship for what's good for them, as opposed to what's good for the other. And that's the subtle form of the same thing which leads to Avodah Zorah. And it comes from, the source of it comes from the Acharayim of the Ratzon, the source, the backside of Hashem's will.
Okay.
Excuse
so
me,
if
What? Somebody else? Somebody else.
Go ahead.
So Avi, could you put this chapter in context of what we've been learning beforehand about how the Beinoni works, how the Chachma works on
Sure.
Beinoni? Thank you.
No problem.
Simple.
No problem. Right. All right. Remember this. We started with the basic. I'll try to make this short. We start with the basic. That this book is an instruction manual for becoming a Beinoni. And way back at the beginning, we said, we put on the table that it's an instruction manual for what? What is it teaching the Beinoni what to do? It's how to serve God, obviously, but what it means, how to engage in the world of separation in such a way that separation dissolves and reveals its underbelly of inter-inclusion. In other words, to bring the awareness of godliness into oneself, and with that, make that the force that you charge out into life with and bring godliness to the world. That's what the book is about, right? So, in a certain sense, we can use the language of Basi Lagani, where in the language of Basi Lagani, when the king wants to conquer a city, so the king brings out the deepest treasures, all the money that he has and his grandfather and great-grandfather have collected, he takes them all out and gives them to the foot soldiers so the foot soldiers can win the war. So we're the foot soldiers. We're the people who have been created here to bring light to the darkness. We have to acquire armaments for this battle. So we have to get weapons. We have to get supplies. So the step by step, Tanya is giving us the supplies. First of all, you should know you've been given the treasure, the deepest, biggest treasure you have is your nefesh elokis. And then he tells us about the nefesh elokis, that the nefesh elokis gets its amazing power from the fact that the chokhmah, which is the first level that's embedded in the body, the panemius, has a window into the ayin. Chokhmah me'ayin timotzah. You have to know that you have that. You have a window into the ayin, and you have the power of the Ein Sof within you. And we outside, not so much in Tanya, but we talked about that's compared to the organus, the hidden light which is hidden in the Torah, right? Anochi Hashem Elokecha. God puts His very self in the Torah, and God puts His very self into each and every one of us through our nefesh elokis. Problem: the nefesh elokis. First of all, we may not know that we have that. Secondly, if we know we have it, we don't know how to necessarily flame it up, inflame it so that it should be the powerhouse that enables us. Why not? So now we're in why not? Why not? Because there are other forces that are putting a darkness over that nefesh elokis, and we call them the sitra achra. And now we're explaining in this section sort of the anatomy of the sitra achra, so we can understand very well the other side, where it comes from, how it works, and more particularly, what are the signs of its activity in us. And the sign of its activity in us is that we are more preoccupied with ourself and our self-interest and less preoccupied with the inclusiveness of ourselves with each other, with Ahavas Yisrael, with Hakel, with the whole community coming together, and with bringing the whole world together. So that's where we're home.
Beautiful.
Okay?
Thanks. Really, thank you so much, Abby. Yep.
I have to say, I have to object to that.
Okay.
Because to that last sentence.
Right, because we're not all holding there. No, I'm just saying what's on the page. We're talking here about a person who is preoccupied with himself. I didn't mean to say that we here are all preoccupied with ourselves.
No. I know.
Okay,
I know. Well, the ideal is to be occupied with the community and to do hakel, of course. But just to bring up the point that men and women have different roles in the world, and it very often happens that women learn Torah that's really meant for men, and they start feeling crazy and guilty and running around.
Really?
But really, yeah,
I
really.
never saw one of those.
But the job of the woman is actually to go inside, internal, and to take care of herself, and that's how she saves the world, by being in pleasure and flow and being nice to her family.
You think it's not a job of a man to go inside himself and find
the job of a man is more to be out in the community and minyan, to be out there. It's like when a boy and a girl are born, you have two different brachas. Don't you have two different brachas?
Everybody's got male and female. Everybody's got male and female parts.
It's true, but we're the human manifestation of male and female. That's undeniable. And also there are different brachos when the babies are born. That there's a tova meitiv versus shechianu. So that just goes to show that the shechianu is a bracha for a personal simcha, and a tova meitiv is a bracha for a communal simcha. So just as soon as the babies are born, you make the corresponding brachas.
Right. Okay, I'm not sure of your point. There's definitely a difference between male and female, and everything does contain both male and female, and everyone, whether a male or a female, has the obligation, responsibility, and capability to do to become a Beinoni. So what are you saying different?
Just that last sentence, that to do the right thing, we must not focus on ourselves, but focus on everyone else. That's
right. And that applies equally to men and women. Right?
No, it doesn't. No.
It doesn't?
No.
Well, there's the bat melech panima, right? Kavod bat melech. That's like where you're coming from. But can I add something?
Well, I just want to be clear before you add something. Are you saying that men don't have as much the same Men don't have the responsibility to become hakel and miskalel in the Ratzon Elyon?
No, men do have.
Okay.
It's just that men have the responsibility of hakel, of going out there, and I don't know.
The hakel was for everything. Anashim b'taf.
No, I know. But the people organizing it and the people like worrying about doing the right thing by being out there are the men, not the women.
All right, so the men have a role and the female have a different role. Okay, 1 second. Okay, good. All right, got that. Okay, Rivka, you were going to say something? Or I was saying something?
Yeah, it's a little more universalistic. From this reading today, I think it's the idea of that we're always connected with Hashem, and that Hashem is always leading us, and we can try and connect to the Ratzon Hashem rather than our own personal Ratzon, and that's a way to serve Hashem, and that's I think appropriate for Yud Shvat.
Absolutely. With the Ratzon, the panemius of the Ratzon, not the chitzonius, the acharayim of the Ratzon. So that's it. That we should know that we have both things are happening, right? We do have a feeling of ourselves. I think everybody here has a name and feels themselves to be who they are, and they're not me, and then I'm not you, right? But the enhancement of that leads to a state which is an undesirable state. I am the only one, right? And then we have the panemius of Ratzon, and the B'chein is we need to constantly be aware that we need to learn to observe ourselves a little bit and see to what extent we're behaving in self-interest and to what extent we're behaving in other interests. And it's a very tricky thing because, there was a song, what's the song? Joni Mitchell's song. All I really want to do is bring out the best in you and me. And all I really want to do is bring out the best in me and you. At the same time, you have to know that that's what it's about, bringing out the best in me and you by becoming part and parcel of a relationship, number one, and a community greater than a larger community. And that's through tapping the panemius Ratzon. The panemius Ratzon is if you see yourself engaged in hiskalalos, bringing things together, synthesis, creating group-minded as opposed to self-minded only. So then you can be aware that this is the process. This is the line of becoming aligned with Hashem and doing and being bottled to Hashem's will.
It sounds a little simplistic.
Well, two are speaking.
I'll raise my hand.
Go ahead.
You don't have to. Who's going to speak? You got Rivka and Manufa. Oh, Rivka, your hand is up. Okay.
I did the way. Anyways, it leads to a lot of acceptance. Yeah. If you're on this path, that it's acceptance because you see it's all from Hashem and you just go with it and you do what needs to be done, and it's very serene, very peaceful, very nice.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to have to go. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Very nice. Good discussion. Good discussion.
Good Yantef. Good Yor.